Hello, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this afternoon. This is the second of our local plan webinars. We had the first session last week, which is an introduction to this stage of the consultation and an overview of the local plan making process. And I can drop a link to that session in the chat for the benefit of anyone that wasn't able to make it. Today's session focuses on climate change and water, and in a moment I'll pass over to my colleague Nadeem, and then my other colleague Anna will be presenting some of the slides as well. In the interests of sticking to the time allowed, please do ask whatever questions you like. If you could put those questions in the chat, what we'll have for the last section of the session is a question and answer session. And some questions we might be able to answer in the chat as we go, but others and the bulk of questions I imagine we'll save till the end. If there are any questions that we're able not to get to because of time today, or some that require a particularly detailed or specific answer, we can add those to the frequently asked questions section of the planning portal. And that was the case with a couple of questions, which is 2 questions from the first session that we needed to add to that. But yeah, one way or another, we will answer all of your questions. I will also include a link to the page where all of the future sessions are going to be held. Just as a reminder, they're going to be on Mondays and Wednesdays, so Monday and Wednesday this week, and Monday and Wednesday next week as well. And yeah, we're very grateful for you that you've given up some of your lunchtime to attend. So Nadeem, I'm going to pass over to you to make a start. I'll put myself on mute and just keep admitting people and taking a note of any questions that we get. Thank you all.
Right, thank you, Bryn, and good afternoon, everybody. So today's session, as Bryn said, is the second in the series of webinars that we are hosting on the local plan. Today's session is on climate change and water. Just a brief overview. So I'll set out the policy context as well as the role of planning in responding to climate change, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Anna, who will take us through the local plan policy directions that are being developed, as well as the direct policy directions for the water policies. So in terms of climate change, as you'll all be aware, the council declared a climate emergency, and we're not alone in doing that. There are many other councils across the country that have done and taken a similar position. Corporately, our climate change and sustainability strategy, which we adopted in 2021, sets out what we would want to achieve. And within that, the role of the local plan is an important one, and it will help the council get to net zero by 2030, as that is the target that we've set ourselves. But sort of taking a wider picture, the global position is, as most of you will be aware, the Paris Agreement that sets a global target for reducing emissions to 2 degrees, and then nationally that is supported through the Climate Change Act, which sets out a net zero target for the country by 2015. And then regionally, there are other policies in play as well, and it's into those policies that the work that the council will be doing through its local plan and other policies that we will look to achieve those targets. So in terms of the district's pathway, we have set as an organisation our ambitions, and as a leader for the area, we've said that we would like to do this in one of 3 ways. One is to look at reducing demand, and that is ranging from travel to reducing waste to making and encouraging industrial processes to be more efficient. The second way that we would like to try and get to that end goal is through decarbonising energy, and that is through encouraging greater electric vehicle charging infrastructure in place and helping to deliver that, looking to move buildings and the use of oil and gas away from those. And the third way that we would like to try and achieve this goal is through tackling residual emissions. And so these are emissions which are left behind, and how do we try and deal with those? For instance, increasing tree cover, planting trees. So that's something else we would like to do. So those are the sort of overall goals and objectives as an organisation. Now, moving more specifically to planning, the role of planning in responding to climate change is one which can be undertaken in several different ways. So we can, through planning, support renewable energy generation, both by setting future requirements as well as other ways, encouraging other forms of travel than the car, so making sure that those services are available, shifting people and behaviour towards low emission vehicles, so that when they are used, they are of the most cleanest form of fuel as possible. Looking to buildings, ensuring that water efficiency standards are improved and increased, moving towards making sure that through the construction process, as well as the building fabric, we are building zero carbon buildings, or at least buildings which is closest to zero carbon as possible, and making sure that the whole process is captured through that way. And then sort of lastly, but in no means any less important, looking at what measures we could have in place, such as sustainable urban drainage schemes, tree planting, bee corridors, etc., to mitigate for that climate change effect. Okay, in terms of the local plan, so through the local plan we can do and help to deliver net zero, and that is principally through duties that we would have as planning authorities. The first of which is through the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, which says that as a whole, the documents take into account how we contribute and secure and mitigate and adapt to climate change, and that is supported through National Planning Policy Framework, which for those of you who came to the first session last week will know that the planning system in England is plan-led, and the government's National Planning Policy Framework sits at the top of that hierarchy. So in there is a whole section on climate change, and specifically paragraph 153 in reference to local plans says that we should be taking a proactive approach to mitigating and adapting to climate change. And there are also powers that local planning authorities have, and those come and derive from principally the Planning and Energy Act, which allows local plans to set reasonable requirements or building regulations, and those are in terms of the proportion of energy that is used from renewable energy and low carbon energy. And for those of you with a keen eye, you will see from the land availability assessment that we've had 3 sites put forward for renewable energy development proposals. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that if you haven't already. We can also talk direct people towards having energy efficiency standards in buildings and improving those. And those standards are defined currently through SAP or SBEAM, and the extent of what is reasonable is as yet untested. Now, those are the powers that come out of that act. In terms of sort of trying to implement them, then we would be looking through the spatial distribution strategy and the how growth is distributed across the plan area. And so where do we allow the buildings both to minimise carbon emissions from transport, but also looking to protect the green infrastructure. When it comes to development, the developer payments towards the infrastructure and mitigation through SIL section 106. And again, reiterating a point that I made in the first seminar webinar, which was the local plan has to be evidence-led and evidence-based and supported robustly. So any requirements that we put in the new local plan will need to be justified and have that evidence supporting them. Okay, so that was a quick introduction to the and the background to today's session. So I'm going to hand over to Anna, who's going to take us through the proposed policies that are emerging in the local plan. Anna?
Sorry, Anna, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Let me check whether you're on mute.
You may need to unmute her.
Yeah, apologies, it wouldn't let me unmute myself.
That was my fault, Anna. That was my fault, and I was given permission to unmute.
I was frantically saying I can't unmute it. You can't hear it. It's fine. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just going to run through some of the proposed policies around the topic of climate change. You got the next slide? Yeah, I'm saying. So the climate change policies that we're proposing for the new local plan are just outlined there. CC1, which is a strategic policy which sets out the overall approach to mitigating and adapting to climate change. And then we've got some targeted non-strategic policies, which CC2 and CC3, which are around new build development, including demand reduction, energy efficiency, and solar PV and demand management. Then we've got sustainability development, which you can't just consider this from the point of view of the resulting development, but also during the construction, which is that's covered by policy CC4, which is around sustainable construction. And then for Lewes to become carbon neutral by 2030, there's energy demands, they need to be reduced, and energy generation needs to be switched to renewable energy sources. Therefore, there is a policy around supporting renewable energy development in the plan area. That's policy CC5. And then lastly, a policy on coastal change, given the length of our coast in the plan area and our need to consider the long-term erosion impacts and the coastline that's covered in CC6. These policies have all been, all these proposed policies, they've been informed by the climate change study, which was commissioned to evaluate the national policy, anticipated policy changes, and to provide evidence and justification for deliverable, yet some ambitious policies for the local plan. And the study is available on the consultation website if you want to know more about this topic. So next slide, please. So proposed policy CC1, this is a strategic policy which is proposed to set the overall approach of the local plan to mitigating and adapting to climate change. Climate change is a strategic issue which should be considered and addressed in every development, and the purpose of the policy is to set out these high-level principles to ensure that development will represent sustainable development and include the principles which are set out here. So ensuring that new development is energy efficient and low carbon as possible, encouraging the retrofit of existing buildings to reduce their emissions, ensuring new development is designed to address the risks associated with climate change, supporting suitable opportunities for low carbon energy generation and storage to serve the district, reducing the reliance on private vehicles and the emissions associated with transport, prioritising active travel measures, improving infrastructure, supporting sustainable development and help existing residents to reduce emissions, and working with the natural environment to help reduce emissions and the risks associated with climate adaptation. alongside other benefits like improving biodiversity. So the following slides are then non-strategic detailed policies to underpin this strategic policy. But it's probably just worth taking a point at this moment just to talk about building standards, how this area in terms of building practices and technologies is moving and evolving, because technologies are improving all the time, and nationally building regulations are moving towards improved fabric performance and setting higher standards for new buildings. Part L of the building regs is the key mechanism for implementing the Building Act with regard to the conservation of fuel and power in buildings in the UK. And in June 2022, an updated Part L 2021 came into force, replacing the previous Part L 2013. And this was intended as an interim step before the adoption of the Future Home Standard and the Future Building Standards in 2025. So the recently updated Part L 2021 is intended to deliver an average reduction of 31% for domestic and 27% for non-domestic buildings in regulated CO2 emissions, compared to the Part L 2013 regulations, with an improved fabric specification. But under the Future Home Standard, new buildings will be required to meet significantly higher targets for energy efficiency and carbon savings, and it's expected a new home will have about 75 to 80% less carbon emissions than one built to the 2013 Part L standard. And that's achieved by replacing technologies with low carbon alternatives, having very high quality building fabric, treble glazing, low carbon heating, for example. And Future Building Standards is a similar plan for decarbonisation of new non-domestic buildings, and that's achieved through performance-based standards around high levels of fabric and energy efficiency and the use of low carbon heating technologies, particularly heat pumps and heat networks. So next slide, please. So the decarbonisation of electricity, the climate change study that demonstrates there's a need to transition away from fossil fuels and towards electrical systems, and to support this, it's essential that we do lower overall energy demands on the electrical infrastructure. So fabric and energy efficiency measures are the most cost-effective and reliable way to reduce energy demands. As well as reducing CO2 emissions, this will reduce costs for occupants in new buildings, builds a resilience to supply issues and price fluctuations, and have less impact on infrastructure. The choice of heating and hot water system will have the most significant impact on operational carbon emissions of buildings. But with the decarbonisation of electricity, with plans for the supply from the national grid to be net zero by 2035, this means that heating from systems that use electricity will not only be lower carbon, but they will continue to reduce over the lifespan of the building and become net zero once the grid is fully decarbonised. So new building regulations in the Future Home Standard will enforce the switch from gas boilers to electric heat pumps or lower carbon technologies. However, that policy is still under development. It could be changed, could be delayed. Even if it is delayed, there could be transitional arrangements. As such, there may be a gap between the adoption of the new plan and updated building regulations, which means that there could be new gas boilers still being installed in new developments. And then that cost of replacement is passed on to the homeowner. So the preferred policy direction requires all new development to follow a clear energy hierarchy of reducing energy demands, using energy efficiently, generating and storing renewable energy, and then monitoring energy use. And should meet requirements on space heating, assessing overheating whilst avoiding active cooling systems, use heating systems which align with carbon neutral policy. So this policy, the preferred policy will be clear that gas boilers or fossil fuel heating systems should only be used where it's proven that other options are not technically feasible or financially viable. And next slide, please. So for Lewes to become carbon neutral by 2030, energy demands need to be reduced and energy generation needs to be switched to renewable energy sources. So any increase in energy consumption or additional use of non-renewable energy sources from new developments will make these targets harder to achieve. So generating renewable energy on site helps to meet these targets and can reduce bills for end users. So while the notional building used in the 2021 updated Part L of building regs includes PV in the specification, the the indicative specification for the planned future home standard due to come in 25 does not. Therefore, it could be possible to comply with the proposed building regs through a combination of good fabric, energy efficiency specifications, use of an electric heat pump, and then as the developer would have to factor in that upfront cost of the PV and they don't realise the longer term benefits, they might decide not to include PV if there's no need to do so to comply with building regulations. Additionally, the cost of installing PV during constructions are significantly lower than retrofitting. So there is also justification for the local plan to require this installation during the construction of the development. So although decarbonisation of the grid will result in the use of PV having less of an impact of carbon savings over time, the main driver for the policy will be reducing energy costs, providing energy security and for homeowners and for local power networks. So the preferred policy is to require all developments to incorporate PV and have a presumption to maximise the amount installed, unless it's shown that that's not technically feasible or financially viable. And also development should consider the potential for thermal and battery storage and demand management systems. Next slide, please. So policy CC4, the sustainability of a development should not just be considered from the point of view of that resulting development. During construction, emissions come from the creation of materials used, from bringing those to the site, from the use of machinery. The manufacture and construction of buildings results in a significant amount of energy use and CO2 emissions, and further emissions are produced from buildings due to the materials, the equipment required for their maintenance and renovations during their lifetime, and as well during demolition. So the climate change study showed that embodied carbon emissions are, in many cases, the most significant component of the whole life cycle emissions of a building. And this will only increase as the decarbonisation of electricity reduces the operational emissions over time. So sustainable construction, this links with the circular economy and the approach to retaining as much material in use as possible to extract the maximum value and reducing waste. The preferred local plan policy will support sustainable construction methods and techniques, encouraging the reuse, repair, refurbishment of existing buildings where that is possible, extending the life of buildings and recovering and reusing materials at the end of their life. That would significantly reduce the demand for materials and the waste produced. So policy requiring whole life carbon assessments is also being considered for larger developments, where it would be required to document the whole life carbon assessment and the steps taken to minimise or mitigate these through the design. However, there is a much higher cost and a level of expertise required to carry out such assessments, and that's why at this point they are being considered for larger schemes, and that does need to be tested for our whole plan viability. So next slide, please. So policy CC5, as we've already sort of talked about, Lewes, for those to become carbon neutral by 2030, those energy demands need to be reduced and we need to be switching into renewable energy sources. A transition to a low carbon district, it will involve a change in the way the existing infrastructure is used, and it may require new infrastructure. So new local plan policy will encourage and support the principle of renewable energy generation in suitable locations. It's providing proposals meet all other policies in the plan, and they take account of local constraints such as relation to landscape, visual impacts, amenity impacts. So the local plan can allocate land for new infrastructure, such as renewable energy generation, land for supporting energy infrastructure, including power transmission, distribution, storage systems. The call for sites, which is currently being undertaken alongside this consultation, that seeks to the submission of sites for consideration for renewable energy generation for the local plan. And in addition to that, strategic scale allocations, the local plan will support neighbourhood plans to identify renewable energy sites, including for community renewable energy schemes. Next slide, please. So policy CC6 is in relation to coastal change, and the district has over 14 kilometres of coastline, and the erosion rates vary year to year and at different rates along that coastline. In the long term, erosion will have impacts on the coastline, and in some areas the risks are higher for infrastructure and to properties. A shoreline management plan is a large-scale assessment of the risks associated with coastal erosion, coastal processes, and identifies the most sustainable approaches to managing flood and coastal erosion risks along the coastline. The shoreline management plan for the area is the Beachy Head to Solsey Bill shoreline management plan. And this sets out that in 4 of the 8 policy units in the plan area, the policy approaches manage alignment, realignment, or allowing retreat of the shoreline, or no active intervention, which is a decision not to invest in providing or maintaining defences. These areas at Telscombe Cliffs, Peacehaven to Newhaven Heights, Newhaven to Peacehaven Heights, sorry, Seaford, Tide Mills, and Seaford Head. But there is more detail on this is set out in the climate change topic paper if you do want to know more about the shoreline management plan. A local plan policy, including a coastal change management area, is required by the National Plan Policy Framework. In areas where it's defined in a shoreline management plan that anything other than hold or advance the line, to ensure that there is no inappropriate development or physical changes are avoided to the coast. So on the basis of the shoreline management plan, the new local plan policy will identify areas likely to be affected by physical changes to the coast. It will do so in coastal change management areas, and it will be clear what development will or will not be appropriate in those areas and under what circumstances. But at the moment, further evidence on coastal change and potential erosion is required to precisely define those coastal change management areas. An updated shoreline management plan is expected next year. However, local plan policy is likely to set out what types of development will be acceptable in those areas in the short, the medium, the long-term time periods, and what applications for development would have to demonstrate to be considered acceptable. It's just worth noting it's outside the scope of a local plan to promote management policies for the coastline. For example, whether or not the shoreline should be protected or allowed to erode naturally. That is the purpose of the shoreline management plan. Next slide, please. That does cover the policies, the preferred policies in relation to adapting and mitigating to climate change. And then I'll just move on and talk a bit about the water policies and the water theme, which these are quite closely related to the topic of climate change. Next slide, please. So the aim of the water policies is to work with partnership with other agencies and to guard against the risk of flooding, improving water quality of our rivers by ensuring new development is appropriately located and retains and enhances flood defences, supporting river restoration works, protecting water quality and resources and improving water efficiency in new development, minimising water consumption. So the policies proposed have been informed by the climate change study, the scoping water cycle study and the strategic flood risk assessment. I just run through 3 preferred policies: a strategic policy around flood risk and flood management, then 2 further policies, the protection of water resources and water quality, and water efficiency in new development. Next slide, please. So sources of flooding in the district include rivers, the sea, direct rainfall on the ground, rising groundwater, overwhelmed sewers, drainage systems, reservoirs, and other artificial sources. Flood risk is a significant concern within the plan area. It's predicted to increase as a result of climate change and causing more extreme weather events. The local plan should reduce the district's vulnerability to climate change and flooding, specifically to properties. It's not always possible to avoid locating development in areas at risk of flooding. However, the local plan will steer development away from the areas at the highest risk of flooding. Flood risk policy will look at how development should address flood risk and provide guidance on the range of measures that could be considered on site in order to manage and mitigate that flood risk. The preferred policy will set out requirements for new development to be safe and resilient to flooding, to not increase flooding elsewhere. It also requires site layouts to preserve as much as possible the natural flow of water, ensuring opportunities are taken for the the natural flood management, which involves techniques that aim to work with natural landscape features, characteristics to manage the sources and pathways of floodwaters. Techniques include the restoration, enhancement and alteration of natural features, and they can be multifunctional, can deliver benefits for people and wildlife, offering nature-based solutions. In addition to suitable surface water management measures, these should be incorporated into new development in order to reduce and manage surface water. This should ideally be achieved by incorporating SUDs, which are typically softer engineering solutions inspired by natural processes, such as ponds or swales, which manage water as close to its source as possible. And these techniques can be used to reduce the rate and volume and improve the water quality of surface water, which is discharged from sites. Next slide, please. The quality of the water environment in terms of groundwater, surface water and the sea is of major importance for the ecosystem and biodiversity. It helps to provide good quality drinking water, it's an amenity for recreation and sports, and it impacts on wildlife and the environment. Therefore, water quality is a great concern to the Council. On the 3rd of March 23, a Council motion was passed to ask Southern Water for responses on sewage discharges. On the 23rd of May, another motion was passed to protect our local rivers and sea by taking into account the cumulative impacts of sewage discharge. So the preferred policy and protection of water resources and water quality extends from the current local plan policy, and with further criteria on water quality and specifically the effects on the handling of sewage. This could mean requiring major developments to demonstrate how development would contribute to the protection and enhancement of water bodies, including pollution control, requiring major developments to clarify which treatment works would be managing sewage and how it would be treated, and demonstrate where foul and surface water discharges would be materially increased and that there is adequate capacity for this. Further evidence is still required from a more detailed water cycle study to ensure good water quality in the district and identify any constraints on planned housing growth throughout the plan period. Next slide, please. So policy W3 is about water efficiency and new development. The southeast is classified as an area with serious water stress. This means that the current and future household demand for water is likely to be a high proportion of the available rainfall. So due to climate change with warmer, drier summers to be expected, water availability may decrease while the demand for it will grow. So current building regulations require that the average water usage of a new home is no more than 125 litres per person per day. And our current Lewes District Local Plan policy requires new dwellings to achieve water consumption of no more than 110 litres per person per day. The Council's climate change and sustainability strategy went further than that and set a target of 100 litres per day in new builds by 2030, and also for new builds to be water neutral by 2030. So the preferred policy will set out how developments should address this by requiring and recommending water efficiency and reuse measures in all new developments. Specifically, this could include minimising water consumption and a target for efficiency rate of about 90 litres per head per day, which would be encouraged unless it's proven to be not technically or financially feasible. All proposed developments will be required to be supported by a water calculator demonstrating consumption of a maximum of 110 litres per day. Non-residential development required to achieve BREEAM Very Good or Excellent for water efficiency unless demonstrated impractical. And in major developments, grey water harvesting should be incorporated for WC flushing or washing machine connection unless proven to not be technically or financially feasible. And all new developments should be requiring rainwater harvesting and or surface water harvesting. And another aspect of water availability the local plan can contribute to is leakage reduction. So all new properties are required to be fitted with water meters, therefore there's no need for the local plan to mandate that, but water meters do assist with leakage detection. However, the local plan can ensure that new developments do not add to the leakage problems in the network by requiring developers to supply information on how the development would contribute to a reduction of or minimisation of leaks in the network, including how pipes and networks are resilient to future problems and leakage. So this covers the preferred policies for the water theme. So I'll hand back to Nadeem just to finish up.
Great, thank you, Anna. Hopefully that was interesting and useful. So that was the first of our series, taking you through the detailed policy proposals that are being developed for the local plan. You know, these are early day thoughts. They are directions in which we would like to take the plan in terms of addressing those two thematic areas. As you'll notice from the first session that we did last week, again, we are at the early stages of the consultation process and the plan making process. So there is, and we are doing these seminars as a way of getting you involved in the local plan. So how do you get involved in the local plan and give us your thoughts? Well, as you'll know, that the consultation went live last week, and we are in this period until the 8th of February. And so we're inviting comments, principally through the online platform. And we would like you to comment on every single policy policy direction that is in the consultation document. The link I will put at the end of this presentation. What I would really, and speaking on behalf of the team, and why more widely, what we really encourage people to do is to use that online platform to respond to the consultation, rather than emailing us the comments. And that is because everything that we received through email or post, we have to transcribe into the consultation portal, and at the same time we'll then have to come back to you and ask you lots of questions under data protection. So if you are able to use the online platform, that is the way we would encourage you to respond and engage with the consultation. You can find out more about the consultation. As I said, we are running until the 8th of February, and it's really important that we do hear from you. The next set of webinars the next one is this Wednesday at 12 o'clock at the same time on the same platform. And then later on in January, we will hold some in-person events throughout the plan area. To get involved, that's the link to the consultation platform. You'll find all of the evidence and the consultation document hosted there, and the QR code there allows you to scan on your phone and take you directly to that page. Just to reiterate the point that Anna was making, so the policy directions have been developed on the basis and with input and with regard to the evidence that is being developed for the local plan. That evidence in the shape of the climate change evidence study, as well as the water cycle study and the strategic flood risk assessment studies, are all available online for you to read and look through in your own good time. If there is evidence, technical evidence that you hold and that you think, well, we've missed, then again, we'd encourage you to submit that through the consultation. And more specifically around the policies, we set out a number of policies that we consider are appropriate for us to be developing for the local plan. Are there policies that are missing? And if so, what are those policies? And or is there something more that you would like us to see, or you'd like to see more on as we move towards the draft local plan in the spring? So, Brent, I think that is the end of the presentation. So if we're open to Q&A.
Thanks very much, Nadeem, and thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, we've got a few questions that are coming. So the first couple relate to decarbonisation and net zero targets. And there's a question following a recent TV programme called Climate Fight, hosted by Kevin MacLeod. There's information shared in that programme about a ministerial statement which prevents local plans from imposing any standards that are greater than the current building regulations. And can you provide clarity on that, please? I.e., are you able to set more ambitious decarbonisation and net zero targets than government?
Yep. Yep, it's correct that there is a written ministerial statement from 2015 which did say you can't set targets above a certain amount above building regulations. However, things have sort of moved on since then, and I think this is set out in our climate change study, which that did look at this issue and set out that we essentially can. There's provisions with the NPPF, and there's the government's has committed to reducing energy demand, and there have been other local authorities that have set more ambitious targets than building regs, such as Cornwall, Somerset, Bath. So there is precedent there for other local authorities going above what that written ministerial statement said in 2015.
Thank you, Anna.
And just to add, Bryn, to what Anna was saying there is through the local plan, or I should say, the local plan, we will look to seek to set minimum levels that we would require. And so when you have that as your starting point, there is always the option to talk and speak and try and achieve higher standards through that process.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you both. So the next question is about building materials, and are there any policies to require the use of low and ultra low carbon concretes and cements in development?
Yes, this sort of fits in with policy CC4 and sustainable construction, and looking at the materials used in developments. So there wouldn't necessarily be a policy that requires only the use of those materials, but policies around what the choice of materials and their carbon footprint, their carbon emissions that are generated from that fits under that policy of CC4.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Anna. And then the last question we've got here before I'll just go back and check the chat again. It's about water quality and flood control, and specifically how are domestic and industrial water supplies being considered in housing planning?
So I'm thinking this question is around sort of the other side of things we've discussed. So we were talking about water quality and flooding in developments. There is another topic area around infrastructure, which looks at more the availability of water and water supply around and capacity for development in the plan period. So I think that's possibly what this question is directed more towards, that infrastructure side. So I'd encourage them to look at that, to other themes as well, and how these all fit together.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, and I understand there's the webinar on the 20th of December is going to focus on infrastructure as well as community facilities and design of the built environment. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to give those watching a bit more of an opportunity to put any questions into the chat or ask for any clarification on anything that Anna or Nadeem has said.
Yeah, and while people do that, can I just throw a question out there for those on the call and encourage them to try and respond via the chat. So the question is, what do you think are the most important things that we can do to address climate change with the local plan? So I'll just repeat that again. So one of the most important things that we can be looking to do through the local plan you've heard from us in terms of what policy directions and policies we're considering to develop as part of the local plan. So where are those challenges and things that are really important to you?
Yeah, we've had a first response, Antonia, talking about an interest in exploring construction in lime, hay, and hemp, etc., low carbon materials.
All right.
So I was saying radically change our agricultural methods. I was saying energy efficiency for new buildings, including insisting on solar PVs on all developments. Ensure all developments have carbon reduction plans in construction. Okay, look, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for being here. As I've said, we will upload the recording of this session to YouTube in case you want to watch any of it back or share it with colleagues, friends, or family. Thank you very much indeed, Nadeem and Anna, for presenting, and thank you very much indeed, everyone, for attending today and taking your time to do that. We've got our next session this Wednesday at midday again, and that's going to be exploring homes, jobs, and spatial strategy options. And details of it's actually the same link. We're going to be using the same Zoom webinar link for all of these sessions, so if you can just save the one you've already used. Please do continue to use the planning portal policy to look through the documents and provide your feedback. And yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you all very much indeed, and yeah, we hope to see you at one of the future sessions.